What's the creepiest experience you've ever had? Story 1. Not long ago, I had gotten my hands on my very first automobile, and in an effort to burn rubber and have fun, I hit the country roads. I pulled over to respond to messages and peruse Reddit in my new automobile. After 30 minutes of wheel spinning and speeding, it was about 7 o'clock in the evening and just beginning to darken. Observing me with wide eyes, a man of about 6 feet stood in my rearview mirror, crouching just low enough to meet my eyes. He wore a black canvas mask and had his hood pulled up. Thankfully, I had shut the driver's door before he realized I had observed him. I slammed on the brakes and raced home, not returned. Forget about it. Story 2. Many years ago, when I was around 16 years old, I was playing on my phone in the bottom bed while my younger brother, who was around 9 years old at the time, occupied the top bunk. It was getting late, and I could hear him laughing and playing with toys in the closet. Since there were no lights in the room or closet and I always plugged my phone into the socket next to it, I assumed he was trying to frighten me. He would never stop trying to punish me for the way I scared him. I stood up and turned on the light in the closet after a few minutes, but as I was about to say, "Dude, go to sleep," I noticed that no one was in there. I stared blankly into the darkness in disbelief. Oops, my brother is sound asleep on the top bunk, so I turn around to view him. Because I had no idea what was happening, I sprinted to my parents' room where they scolded me and urged me to go back to sleep. That night I slept poorly. All I could do was wait for the closet to start rustling and giggling. The scariest part is that I had a string of unfortunate events at our prior residence. Story 3. This may have been posted already, but I'm going to share it again. About 15 years ago, while on spring break as a badass college student, I went on a tour of an antebellum home in Vicksburg, Mississippi with a friend. We were driving across the South on our way back to Dallas. Upon approaching the historic house, we noticed a few people lounging in lawn chairs outside. They informed us that the house had been destroyed in a fire and was closed for restorations, but they nonetheless invited us to peek in the front windows if we wished. We gladly obliged. A black woman, dressed in neat but unadorned clothing, was seen pouring tea onto a silver tray as we peered into what appeared to be the dining area. With a serious expression on her face, she departed the room. I didn't utter a word until we crossed the river into Louisiana almost half an hour later, so I assume I was quite confused about what was going on. My companion gave me an unequivocal yes. When I asked if she had seen the same thing I had, she described her precisely as I had. Assuming it wasn't a tourist hoax, I would expect there to be internet discussion of other occurrences, but I can't help but think it was all staged. What the heck? It was around 2003 and I can still picture it in my mind. Story 4. While my now husband was at work, I stayed at his apartment shortly after we started dating. Because he worked until 2 or 7 in the morning, I spent every night there by myself. I never gave it much thought, since whenever he left, I would go to bed and he would join me in bed when he returned. As I slept one night, I sensed a presence that wanted to cuddle up with me. I didn't give it a second thought. I simply assumed my boyfriend had gotten home from work. Just a few hours later, I wake up for work and discover that I'm all by myself. My boyfriend had just stepped out of the back door as I left the bedroom. He appeared bewildered and inquired as to the reason behind the open back door. I stated that I was unaware. I then saw that the front door was slightly ajar as well. The apartment was located on the second level of a massive old home, so bear that in mind. Two smaller flats were downstairs, and there was an apartment on the top level that we shared with someone else. The apartment we lived in had two entrances, one at the rear that led into the kitchen and another that led into the bedroom from a staircase at the front of the house. The back door was our default. Thanks to a hook and eye lock and the lock on the knob, the front door remained securely locked throughout. Even now, 3 years later, I still don't remember who climbed into bed with me that fateful night. I can only tell you that the flat was completely unoccupied and that both the front and back doors were ajar. In addition, we moved into our current apartment while we were away. When we returned, we discovered the basement door open, with no outside access, that nothing had been stolen, and that the front door was still locked with the deadbolt. Okay, no joke. This is pure nightmare fuel. The feeling of someone snuggling up to you while you're sleeping and realizing later it wasn't your partner, that gave me chills. And that basement door thing? Nope, absolutely not. I'd be sleeping with a baseball bat and a priest on speed dial. Story 5. I was in a hotel room a few years ago, and it was really terrifying. The room was really only one of two rooms. My parents and siblings and I were in the other. I roll my eyes and try to fall back to sleep when I hear a swish of the bathroom door handle in the middle of the night. However, there is no one there. A little while later, I perceived the sound of approaching footsteps, but as I was nearly sleeping, I chose to disregard them. An icy hand brushes against my neck right before I fall back into slumber. In my haste to find out what had touched me, I sat up abruptly. It won't open is a voice I overhear a little child expressing as I spin around. My sister was perhaps 4 or 5 years old when this happened. I got up and opened the door for her since she needed to use the restroom but couldn't. And the worst thing, she climbed into my bed as soon as she emerged, forcing me to spend the night on the floor. Story 6. After becoming bored of mountain biking, I was heading down a woodland path when I glanced up and saw someone farther up the path. My legs hurt like cows and I cannot breathe, so it doesn't matter that I didn't notice them earlier. The way was long and straight. I proceed to walk, but the figure abruptly halts and spins around. I'm anxious since my initial thought is that he might be accompanied by other pals, but instead he simply raises one arm and begins wildly waving while tilting his head from side to side for a whole minute. My pulse is racing, and I'm contemplating abandoning my bike and bolting in the other direction to escape this creep. After that, he comes to a halt, makes a U turn to the right, and then heads into the forest. Now is the point when I begin to crap my pants rather than fret of kidnapping. If you walk off this path in the rainforest, you will quickly become lost and unable to find your way back. I almost jumped from the cliff, but the path was perfectly straight, so I hopped on my bike and pedaled furiously to return to the road. As I near the spot where the figure disappeared into the trees, a foul odor clings to my throat. I almost had an accident because of how severe it was, but I caught myself just in time and I didn't stop until I got to the bottom of the trail. Then I continued on the road to my car. After selling my mountain bike and purchasing a racing cycle a few months later, I never returned to that place. Of that noise, I am unsure if it was the result of a village idiot or something else entirely. Story 7. While serving in the army, I had a terrifying dream in which I was sleeping on the top bunk and experienced sleep paralysis. I saw my sleeping companion enter the room searching for me. He walked over to my bed and stared at me, his face gradually turning a strange, evil shade with long teeth. Then, out of nowhere, hands emerged from under the bed and began to grab me. I was fully conscious throughout, my eyes wide open, yet unable to utter a word. Other people were in the room when it happened, so I was attempting to yell, "Wake me up," loudly. After a while, they realized I was muttering and came to get me. Almost certainly the most terrifying experience of my life. Story 8. A rundown hotel from the 1920s in my hometown is said to be haunted and offers ghost tours. I went on a weekend excursion with a bunch of friends, and I didn't mention the severe stomach cramps I was having until about halfway through the trip, when I was in one of the hotel rooms. Approximately 1 minute after that, the tour guide reveals that the establishment formerly had a client who had illegal abortions performed there. Tragically, the boyfriend of one of those women who had abortions from him was the one who killed him. The tour guide continued by saying that women on previous trips have complained of severe abdominal pain while in that room. Terrified me to no end. That is terrifying. The fact that you were already feeling intense stomach pain before hearing the story makes it so much worse. It's one thing to get spooked after a creepy tale, but to have a physical reaction line up with a disturbing history like that, that's beyond coincidence. It feels personal. Like whatever energy lingers in that room recognized you or you tapped into something you weren't meant to. I would have been out of there immediately. No ghost tour is worth that kind of experience. Story 9. There is a ghost in my parents' house. This is the most terrifying story I've ever heard, but I can't recall if I've ever posted about it. My then boyfriend and I were watching a movie while we were in high school. It was alright with me as we had only just begun watching the movie at 8 when my folks stated he had to go by 11 or whatever. I distinctly recall turning on both the room light and the television. My younger brother rapped on my open door, yelling, "Pink, you gotta wake up. BF needs to go home," after my brother and I fell asleep. Even though I don't use a sleep timer or anything else on my TV, I found that no one had turned off the bedroom light, and I also found that my bedside lighting was still turned on. My parents are really strict and would have scolded us if they had known that my boyfriend had been there even as early as 11:15 in the morning, so I woke up my boyfriend and told him he had to leave immediately when I saw that it was 4 in the morning. My brother returned to his room and closed the door after I thanked him for rousing me. His door swung open and closed very loudly in the summer because the wood expanded, but I never once heard it close. My brother was like, "What?" when I thanked him again the following morning for waking me up. Outside of his chamber, he remained still. Although he never slept with the light on since my parents would have been so worried about power waste, he did mention that he woke up at 5 in the morning with the light on in his bedroom. That was the most unsettling event that occurred there. Story 10. An automobile pulled up in front of our house yesterday night, according to my sister. It allegedly switched off the lights and honked the horn softly, according to her. Standing up, she switched on her bedroom light, the rectangle of illumination in an otherwise shadowy house that is typically visible from the street. The car seemed to drive away as she watched through her see through lace curtains. She assumed it had gone because she couldn't see its taillights. After getting back into bed, she heard someone tapping on her window, and her dog began to bark, like he always does when someone is at the door. Last night, someone might have broken into our house, but she didn't tell us, looked out the window, or even got up to check the doors. Story 11. Late one night, my dog wouldn't stop barking at the door. Going to gather him up, my mom and I were in the middle of a chat. The dog bolted inside as soon as I opened the door, and I moved back a little distance to give my mom a chance to shut it. I could see the door closing from where I stood, as it was slightly ajar. As she pushed the door shut, my mom held a drink in one hand. Just as she was about to close the door, it banged back, as if someone had smashed it into her. The door was only 4 or 6 inches from shutting. Even when her drink spilled, she wasted no time slamming the lid back on. I could tell there was absolutely nothing when I peered out the door. We both took off running, and then we looked around to make sure nothing was blocking our path. Just couldn't locate anything. Every now and again we bring it up again. It seems strange. Story 12. While my cousin and I were out kayaking, darkness descended. In order to reach rivers and lakes that could not be reached directly by boat, we had to ford a few forest pathways. We couldn't keep track of time, but our determination to return to camp was unwavering. Before reaching the main lake where our camp was situated, we were on our designated path through the woods. We managed to get our canoe to the lake, but we had to go back to the river where we started so we could retrieve our paddles and other gear. Due to the late hour and cloud cover, the forest was completely dark. Because our flashlight's batteries were dying, it hardly lit up the area where we shone it, so we switched it off and waited for our eyes to acclimate to the darkness. Gathering all of our belongings, we set out on foot to return to the main lake, where our boat lay. I could hear something following us from about 30 feet away, but if we halted to identify it, it would go silent. The stroll, which just took 10 minutes, seemed to go on forever. Bears kept popping into my head, but I tried to convince myself that it might be any number of other inquisitive creatures. Until we reached the canoe, we merely continued strolling calmly without changing our pace. I hurriedly got into the canoe and headed back to camp. Although I've never been frightened by the outdoors before, being pursued into the woods at night was the most terrifying experience of my life. This one had my heart racing. There's something uniquely terrifying about being deep in the woods, in total darkness with dying flashlights, and realizing you're not alone. The detail that whatever was following you would go silent whenever you stopped, that's bone chilling. It's like it knew how to avoid being detected. And sure, it could have been a curious animal, but it also could have been something with less innocent intentions. When nature goes quiet and your instincts scream that something's watching you, that's not just fear, that's survival mode. You handled it exactly right by staying calm, but I don't blame you one bit for being shaken. That's the kind of experience that sticks with you long after you're safe again. Story 13. I was taking my sweetheart for a romantic trip in the countryside when we suddenly found ourselves in the middle of nowhere. So we pulled over to play about. A window tinted Jeep pulls up alongside us a few minutes later, then shuts the engine. Quite alarmed, I start my automobile and keep going. After a good 10 to 15 minutes of driving, I still didn't see a soul in the area, so we stopped over. The very next minute, the identical vehicle was following closely behind. On a single occasion, that's okay. We were absolutely terrified twice. We made a hasty exit, resolved not to pause again, and continued on our way home. The same Keep that had materialized twice behind us was parked in a little dirt car park alongside three men, and we didn't go too far down the road to pass it. I'd be surprised if we hadn't been robbed or killed if we hadn't kept going when they pulled up behind us. Story 14. A long time ago, my friend and I were employed by a remote plastics plant. On one occasion, we were working extra when our line went down. Since we would have been idling around doing nothing productive, they sent us home. It was a little unsettling at night at this remote location in the country. Nothing more than a medium sized plant encircled by seemingly endless fields. We next made our way down the driveway that led to the main road, a narrow two-lane road that appeared to be used exclusively by the factory's employees. As we approach the stop sign, we begin to reduce our speed when what seems like from directly behind us in the rear, a woman's screams can be heard. I slammed on the brakes and looked in the rear seat, but there was nobody there. I jumped out of the car with my friend because I was terrified we had run over someone. It was early in the morning, and the only lights I could see were the ones in my car. Everywhere was searched. Nobody else seems to be in the area either. We couldn't stop asking, "Are you certain it was a scream? It might have been the brakes." We continued attempting to come up with other explanations, such maybe the shocks, but nothing seemed to fit. However, I am still unable to identify it because it was so sharp and long lasting. We brought it up the following time we were in, but most of the co workers just thought we were nuts. There was one veteran, though, who had a similar experience years before but had kept quiet about it, convinced he was going insane. Didn't linger for much longer following that. I had never before experienced a chill like it. It was the last time it happened. Story 15. I visited Columbine, and it was strange to see tourists snapping pictures and pausing to look around every so often. There was a man in an all black van in the parking lot one night at 9 o'clock after the theatrical practice, and I was the only one there. He began photographing the school, then shifted his focus to me as I made my way towards him. The shutter's release was audible to me. Also, his gait was really awkward. Slow, I sprinted to my vehicle and bolted. The next time I turned around, he had vanished. I was frightened to death. Throughout the night, I was wide awake. Story 16. During a 2 day road trip a few years ago, my family and another family kept pulling into the same gas station and convenience store. The most peculiar part was that they were a nearby family, the same number of boys and girls about the same age, driving a car that looked exactly like ours, and we were both going to the same place, a destination that turned out to be more than 1,300 miles away. It got stranger when, in the last hours of our journey, they sped by us. Then at a petrol station, we noticed a similar vehicle, complete with smoke billowing from the exhaust, and what appeared to be a deer hit on the front. Not terrifying per se, but the discovery of our doppelganger engaged in nearly identical activities as us at the same moment was unusual and unsettling. This is one of those stories that isn't outright scary, but the vibe is deeply unsettling. A mirror version of your family, same number of kids, same destination, same car, showing up at the same gas stations over a 300-mile trip, that's way beyond coincidence. It almost feels like a glitch in reality, like you were shadowing an alternate version of yourselves or somehow caught in a weird time loop where your actions were being echoed by someone else. Story 17, newest, albeit not the creepiest. At the little school where I work, we are housed in permanent trailers. There was a particularly late night when I was working alone in the office, and the trailer was completely dark. I'm in the middle room, heating up some coffee because it's winter, and going to see if any of the other teachers on campus would like some. It's late, I'm bored, and I figured I might as well take a stroll around campus. I was unable to depart from the campus because I was the sole possessor of the alarm code. As I wait for the classroom to respond, I hear a loud but muted moaning sound, so I proceed to the dark end of the room and dial the number. As I stand there terrified, trying to decide whether to wait for her to answer or to flee at the sound of a muted cry. Despite my anxiety, I managed to converse with her and strolled serenely across campus with my coffees in hand. I won't be anxious about being without access while she responds because I have a master key. However, our campus is in the dark, so it's a relief that she's waiting by the door. She is absolutely mortified after I told her what had transpired. After this, we're going to shut up for the night as we've already decided. Consequently, she accompanies me to the office and I secure it. The following morning, as we're debriefing, our VP from that department says, "Oh, you heard the foxes." As is typical at this time of year, I believe they are mating right now. 1 week later, while hiding under our trailer, I saw one of the foxes sprinting across campus. Story 18, not the most terrifying, but it's short. My acquaintance met a photographer her freshman year of college, and the photos she got were stunning. So, we have coffee to talk about potential collaboration, and he generously offers to show me around his studio. By the time we get there, he's already trying to corner me and get me to let him duct tape my wrists together as a sign of trust. I promptly pooped out of there. Oh my god. Just yesterday, I watched a TV show that touched on a similar topic. Across the 1980s, a man named Christopher Wilder went on a killing rampage across the United States. It seems he would lure stunning women to his studio for photo shoots just to kill them thereafter. It appears that every one of his victims was discovered bound with the same kind of rope and bound with duct tape around the wrists and mouths. You were lucky to escape out of there if this is your boyfriend. Regardless, the parallels are striking. Story 19. My buddies and I would frequent my ex girlfriend's house, namely her basement, when we were in the 12th or 13th grade. It seems like the house she resided in was constructed in the 1960s. Since it always seemed like someone was watching us even when we were alone, we decided it would be amusing to leave a recording device on when her family went away for the weekend. Someone forgot to put the recorder in the basement. We gave it a week or so of listening before we realized it had an older woman on it. Do as I say, not as I do, are her exact words, and it was her last statement. No one sounded like her or her mom, and we have no clue who might have spoken it. It ought to have been completely silent because nobody was home. Following that, we refrained from entering her basement. Story 20, I was frightened by this, and it's not even close to the worst on this site. A few years ago, at about 2 in the morning, I was watching YouTube in bed when I suddenly heard a tremendous crash coming from the room across from me. I walked in to double check that nothing had tipped over, but it was all in its usual spot. I made my way back to my bedroom, feeling a little uneasy. I could hear what sounded like water trickling from downstairs as I walked back. I went downstairs to turn off the sink because I thought someone had left it on. Even though the sink wasn't turned on, I could hear the trickle of rain outside because the rear door was ajar. Strangely, the house alarm never went off, even though the door could have opened in the middle of the night. I returned upstairs to recheck the room where the bang had been heard, but this time I couldn't find anything, so I shut the door. Nothing really strange occurred following that night, but I did have some difficulty sleeping. This is the kind of story that messes with your sense of safety, because nothing dramatic happens, but everything feels wrong. A loud crash with no source, a door wide open in the middle of the night without the alarm going off. That's nightmare fuel because it's subtle and possible. It walks the line between supernatural and real world danger. Was it a ghost, a glitch in the alarm system, or something or someone that opened the door and left before you noticed? Story 21. Two ideas occur to me. My childhood home was a converted stagecoach stop. A lot has transpired within the home since the first section was constructed in 1865. When I was around 7 years old, something happened that really stuck with me. After buying the house in 1987, my dad did a lot of updating to make it modern for that era. He severed the outside bell that led to his house phone, among other things. According to him, if you're in the garden at the right time, you can hear a doorbell. So he cuts the wiring that goes to the bell, but he decides to retain the bell itself because it adds character to the house and is historically significant. My dad and I are out in the yard, perhaps 15 years later, when we hear this bell ringing. Were there no ways out of our fear and confusion? As soon as we hurried inside, we dialed the house line, but no one answered. The mystery persists. Secondly, I was regaling my girlfriend with tales of the property's past as a stagecoach stop in the late 1800s and early 1900s while we were lying in bed together approximately a year ago. Her reaction becomes increasingly unsettling as I recount these anecdotes, saying, if only these walls could talk. The word talk escaped my lips at the same instant as a lamp in the corner of my room, which I haven't turned on for years, began to flicker dramatically. It goes without saying that we were both frightened. There are many more anecdotes regarding the house where I spent my childhood, but these are the ones that have come to mind recently.